We're talking to another baller pilot today in the hangar. Welcome to In the Hangar. I'm Christy Wong.
And I'm Dan Milliken. And today we're going to be talking to an incredible pilot who's had 50 years in the industry. Before we do that, I want to talk about our title sponsor real quick. Why don't you tell us about it?
Yes, we do. We have a new title sponsor for this show. Now, we don't enter into sponsorships or endorsements lightly because we have to believe in the products. And we do that with Wingfield Aviation. Check them out. Give them a call for all of your aircraft maintenance needs.
Okay, so now that you've done that, I want to introduce Tom Tweedale. Tom, thank you so much for coming on to our show.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
It's an honor to have a pilot such as you be here to impart your wisdom to us. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, so let's just go ahead and dive right in. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean, you've been flying for a really long time. What got you interested in aviation?
Well, I've been flying 54 and a half years.
But you only look 55. How could that be?
Well, mirrors and magnets.
There we go.
My dad worked for TWA. He went to work for TWA about a year and a half before I was born. I flew before I could walk.
Wow.
And I first started telling my mother when I was 4 years old I was going to be an airline pilot. And I never set my sights on anything else.
That's incredible.
That's all I ever wanted to do was be an airline pilot.
What? Do you remember the first airplane you were ever on?
No, I don't, because I was about 9 months old.
Okay. What kind of airplanes did your dad fly?
He wasn't a pilot. He was a systems engineer.
Oh, okay.
So that was back in the day where you had 3 people on the flight deck.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Or more even.
Yeah, I started my career as a flight engineer.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about you then. So how old were you when you started flying?
I was 13 when I flew an airplane for the first time. I was a Boy Scout. I was working on my flying merit badge. And one of the electives is taking a discovery flight. My dad knew a man that he worked with who was part of a flying club. And he took me up one Saturday morning in Aluscombe. And I got to fly the airplane, and I was only up about 30 minutes. We came down, and he told my dad I was a natural.
That's awesome.
And you couldn't have shot me down with a howitzer for 6 months. I was so high, just having had a chance to fly the airplane.
Awesome. How old were you when you wound up getting your private pilot certification?
I was 20.
Okay.
I started learning to fly on the 4th of September, 1965. It was a Saturday. I soloed on the following Friday.
Wow.
And the following Tuesday, my instructor and I crawled in a Cherokee in Kansas City downtown, and we went to Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Wow.
And right after we took off, he says, "Okay, you see that town out there?" And I looked, and I said, "No." And he got really mad, really mad. What in the matter is, what's with this guy? And, "Well, you see this one over here?" "No." Oh, he's just livid. Pretty soon I began to figure out the towns are clusters of buildings and trees, and there's probably a water tower somewhere. And I began figuring it out. Well, between Kansas City and Minneapolis, there are 3 major cities, Des Moines, Mason City, and Lamoni. And there's one river, the Des Moines River, and that's it. It's all farmland. Every half a mile, there's a northwest road. Every half a mile, there's an east-west road. In the northeast corner of every one of those squares is a farmhouse, a barn, and a set of green John Deere tractors. They all look exactly alike.
Huh.
We got to Minneapolis. We landed at the international airport. We went, got something to eat, came back out. I pre-flight the airplane's full of gas. I'm ready to go back to Kansas City. And I get in the airplane. He says, "Okay, I'll see you back in Kansas City." And he climbs in the twin sitting next to me. He's going home.
He was going on a ferry trip.
That's why I was up there.
Oh.
So first I realized I was going home alone.
Your first solo.
I've been learning to fly
For a week.
for a week and a half.
Oh, wow.
I got my private license on the 3rd of October, 29 days. I got my commercial on the 22nd of November, and my instructor's rating on the 17th of January. And came back from the flight test, and my instructor, who was the chief pilot at the flight school, was talking to a man I'd never seen before. And he turns around, he sees me walk through the door, and he said, "Well, did you pass?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Good, this is John McDonald. He's your first student." I put my bag down, went and took a nervous whiz, came back out, crawled in the same airplane I just took the flight test in, and gave the guy a lesson. 3 weeks later, my instructor had a near-fatal wake turbulence accident, which inspired the requirement to teach us wake turbulence knowledge. And he was in a body cast for 6 months. I instructed 960 hours in the next 6 months as their only full-time instructor.
Wow.
Oh, my gosh.
I went to work for Braniff on the 1st of August, 2 days less than 10 months after I got my private license. I had
Wow.
1,200 hours, Cherokee and
Okay.
Type-Patient.
Well, I have to ask though, if when you and your instructor landed and he got into the other plane, did he endorse your logbook for solo?
Yeah.
He did. He did all the
Well, I was
paperwork.
already solo, but he also signed me off for solo cross country.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, but that's why I realized why he got so mad at me when I couldn't see the towns,
Because
because
you needed to be able to get back.
I need to be able, if wasn't able to come home, he's going to have to come back with me and have to go up a second time and get that airplane.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, that's almost as fast as you've gone through private to.
Not exactly, but
No,
Tom's a little bit more baller than I am. Actually, a lot more. So you said you started with Braniff with 1,200 hours.
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible. And you started as a flight engineer.
As a flight engineer on the Lockheed Electra, 4-engine turboprop.
Oh my gosh, on the Electra.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I was 21 years old, so a minimum age to start your career. And didn't have any idea when I was going to get to upgrade. Nobody knows when they're going to upgrade to co-pilot or captain. And I was concerned. I wanted to be sure to keep my flying skills as good as I could. And I still don't know how she did it. My wife was looking through the Dallas Morning News, and she found a 3-line ad in the classified section looking for a Cherokee instructor. So I called the number, and I said, I can't get paid to fly by anybody but Braniff. I knew I could cheat, but all I'd have to do is blow a tire somewhere and call the FAA's attention to me, and I'd lose my airline job. So I said, let me fly your airplanes. I'll check people out for you. I'll instruct in your airplane. Every time I fly an hour, give me a half-hour credit in your airplane. He said, okay, yeah, we can do that. I went and got checked out in the airplane. About 2 weeks later, I'm at home. I get a phone call, and this guy says, I'm learning to fly in the airplane. He says, my instructor is Jim so-and-so. He said he's a Continental pilot. He just came in from Houston. He's too tired to fly with me. He said, I just saw your name in the book. He said, would you come out and fly with me? I said, sure. Where are you? And he said, I'm at the airplane. I said, well, start your pre-flight. I'll be there by the time you finish it. Because I was living on the west side of Love Field. We were down in Mustang, so it wasn't that far away. And sure enough, I got there by the time he finished his pre-flight. We went out and flew, had a really nice time. Came back, and I'm signing his logbook, debriefing the flight. And there was a guy sitting in a couch, only other person in the FBO. And I wasn't paying any attention to him, didn't know him. We finished our debrief, and we had a very pleasant flight. And we start toward the door, and the guy stands up, and he says, are you Tom? And I said, yeah. He says, Dave Fisher, I own the airplane. I'd never met him before. And he says, would you be interested in managing the airplane for me? I'm 22 years old. I said, what? And I said, actually, I was 21. And I said, what's involved? He said, well, we'll change the name in the paper to your name for the rental. Your number for the rental. You collect the money, send it to me once a month, keep track of the maintenance, and that's it. I said, yeah, I guess I can do that. A year later, he decided he wanted to sell the airplane, gave me first right of refusal. I'm 22 years old, and I'm thinking about buying an airplane.
Yeah.
So I was just in agony. What do I do? I could lose my shirt. What do I do? I was watching The Tonight Show. And Johnny Carson had William F. Buckley on. You probably don't remember him. You're not old enough to remember William F. Buckley.
I'm not, sir. I'm going to be honest.
He was, Johnny Carson asked him, he said, who was the most influential person in your life? He said, I had a favorite uncle who always told me, don't invest in retrospect. We all know someone who can say, see that corner lot right there? 10 years ago, I could have bought that lot for a song. A song. Now look at the high-rise apartment on it. Well, his uncle says, Why didn't you buy it? Well, we were getting married, we were saving for the car, and well, you had reasons. Make your decision and live with it. I called Dave Fisher the next day and bought the airplane.
Awesome.
Eventually, I had my business up to 8 airplanes, 14 employees. At one time, it was the second largest flight school in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Wow.
And I'm still operating it
That's incredible.
after 53 years.
Do you still have the same Cherokee?
Oh, no, no.
That would have been a cool story.
Yeah, that would have been a cool story. No, I've been through 10 Cherokees since
You
then.
hear that? You can go through more Cherokees. You don't have to stick with just one Cherokee.
Oh, no. Yeah, I do.
I love the Cherokee. I learned to fly in it. I've got about 23,000 hours in it.
Oh, yeah.
About got it figured out.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, anybody that knows me knows I'm definitely a PA-28 person.
Yeah.
So I have the Warrior.
Love the
so
airplane, yeah.
Love the airplane. So let's talk about your airline career. You were with Braniff. So
Mm-hmm.
when did you wind up upgrading?
Well, I upgraded just 5 months later.
Wow.
I was only an engineer for 5 months.
So you're like 22 and got to be.
I had just turned 22 when I upgraded to co-pilot.
Wow.
Now, bear in mind, I'd never flown a multi-engine airplane, one with retractable landing gear or more than 4 seats. I also had an instrument rating, but I'd never been in the clouds.
Wow.
And
And you're doing the 4-prop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
we did all of our training in the airplane. We didn't have simulators for it back then.
Right.
We were lucky to have indoor plumbing back then. So we did all of our training in the airplane. They took us down to San Antonio, put us up in a hotel. The airplane comes in about 8, 9 o'clock in the evening. The mechanics check it out. We come out at midnight, and we go fly for 4 hours. And we do our stalls and our steep turns and everything in the airplane. Same thing in the jets. I did. If I'd had to fly the simulator before I ever flew a 727, I don't think I'd ever made it, because we did everything in the airplane.
Wow.
And that first night, we went out, we did all our stuff, we did our stalls and our steep turns, we come back, we shot a few landings, and we made a full stop, and we taxi back, and we're ready to take off again. And the captain says, okay, on this takeoff at V1, I'm going to cut the number 1 engine. And
With
he's-
passengers on board?
No, it's,
Oh, okay.
it's training. And he said, what are you going to do? I said, well, I got to push right rudder. He said, how much? And I said, well, all of it. And he gives me this funny grin, and he says, it isn't going to be enough. And about that time, he pushes the power up. We start our takeoff roll, and at V1, bam, he cuts that power. And just almost immediately, we turned about 30 degrees to the left, and I've got all the rudder in there, and it's not coming back. It's just not going any farther left. Well, he brought the left engine back in because he knew that was about to happen. We straightened back up, made our takeoff. And I made it through the program. God love those instructors at Braniff. I tell you, they always treated me as if I was going to make the program. The parameters, 100 feet, 10 degrees, and 10 knots. That's what's required to make the program. And boy, you look down to the chart to see what's that frequency, and you look back and you climb 300 feet.
Right.
I mean, it's just amazing. The airplane did 340 knots. So, I mean, it changes altitude, heading, airspeed, just at the blink of an eye.
Wow.
And they got me through the entire program. And back in those days, we didn't, co-pilots didn't do IOE. IOE is initial operating experience. They do now. New co-pilots get 25 hours with a check airman now on the line. But we didn't at that time. When we finished our training, the training instructors would call crew scad and say, okay, you got another live one here. And 2 days later, I'm scheduled out on a trip, a regular line trip with a line captain who isn't expecting me to be there. And we flew from Love Field to Oak City to Wichita to Kansas City to O'Hare. And we alternated legs. I flew the leg to Wichita, he flew to Kansas City, I flew it on to O'Hare. It was 301 at O'Hare. I've never made an actual instrument approach, and I'm about to.
Oh, wow.
They line me up. O'Hare is some of the best controllers in the world at O'Hare. And they get us lined up perfectly. You don't recognize that stuff.
Well, you just looked at your iPad for ForeFlight.
Yeah,
and
right.
And flew it on down.
Yes. So it comes in, I'm on the glide slope, I'm on the localizer, I get lined up, and I'm there a good 5 seconds. And bam, they're going so fast they bent the needles. Captain grabs the airplane away from me, and he's wrestling with it. And I dropped my hands in my lap, my chin hit my chest, and there went my job. My very first flight, the captain has to take the airplane away from me. I can't believe it. He gets it all squared away, and it finally comes back down. He gets it trimmed out and gets the power set, waits a second and says, "Okay, you got it." I'd have kissed him on that bald forehead if I hadn't been busy. I grabbed those controls and I kept it lined up, and we broke out at 300 feet. There's 3-2 left right in front of me. I landed on it. In my career, I have 3,000 hours as a check airman. And I did primarily co-pilots. I loved flying with the co-pilots, way more than the captains. And I had at least 10 co-pilots on the 727 that had fewer than 500 hours total time. And some of those guys were so far behind the airplane, if we'd had an accident, they wouldn't have been found in the wreckage. But they had such a great attitude. I mean, they loved being there. They were getting a chance to fly in a jet, and they just loved it. And I had probably 4 or 5 that did the same thing I did on that first flight. They just totally lost control of it. And I'd grab the airplane, and I'd get it squared away, and I'd get it stabilized and trimmed. And I'd wait a second. What did I say?
Your airplane.
You got it. They did exactly what I did. Boy, they grabbed it. And the last thing I said was, "Thank you, Bill Kearns."
That's
The
awesome.
captain that was so generous to
Wow.
to do that for me the first time when I was so new and so green.
Wow.
I had so many just great people that I worked with at Braniff that were so benevolent and generous.
That's
All of them
wonderful.
gentlemen.
Well, speaking of Braniff, we all know that Braniff went bankrupt and then tried to reorg and went bankrupt again. How did that affect you?
Well, I was in Orlando as part of the volunteer sales group, calling on travel agencies, trying to get them to promote the airline and sell tickets on it. And so we got back to the hotel, and the first thing on the news was that we'd shut down that day. So here we are in Orlando, no longer employees. We went out to there were about 10 of us. We were all of us in uniform. And we went out to the airport the next day, and I will not name the competitor, but we went to the counter, and I said, "There are 10 of us." I said, "We're trying to get back to Dallas. Can you help us out at all?" And he stood there and grinned at me like, "You idiot, you went to work for them in the first place, you deserved it." The Delta agent at the counter next to us motions me over, and he says, "How many have you got?" I said, 10. He hands me 10 tickets.
Oh, wow.
And he says, "It's at B5. That's how we got home. Delta just gave us tickets to come home.
Wow.
That's really cool.
So that, and then we were out for 22 months. And when we came back, I didn't have quite enough seniority to come back as a captain. Came back as a senior co-pilot. And my first trip was DFW to Miami and back. And I was flying with a captain I really didn't like to be around on the airplane. He was okay off the airplane, but he was not pleasant to be with on the airplane. He didn't put any emphasis at all on smooth. All he wanted was the numbers. Well, as you probably know, we calculate our speeds for every takeoff in those big airplanes. V1 and V rotate are the same number on the 727. And V2, of course, is the speed you're going to climb out at if you've had an engine failure. Well, when you reach V1 rotate in the 7.2, you bring the nose up to 9 degrees, nose up pitch, and then when it leaves the ground, you bring it on up to 15. The airplane will do 20, but the passengers don't like that, so we stop at 15. And I knew that he was not putting any emphasis at all on smooth. So we started a takeoff roll to come back to DFW, and he calls V1 rotate, bam, I go right to 9 degrees, the nose comes up, the airplane doesn't do anything. It rises a little bit, comes back down, hits really hard, and comes back, skips a couple of times, and comes really hard, and finally staggered in the air to stay. I'm thinking that is the worst takeoff I have ever made in my entire life. And everybody on the airplane knows it. They're all sitting back there thinking, boy, that 22 months off didn't do him any good. Well, as we're climbing out, I take the data card off the pedestal, and it's got all the numbers for our takeoff. And on the flip side is will be filled out by the flight engineer for the landing. Well, I take a look at the weight, our takeoff weight. I know what our burn-off is going to be. I know what our landing weight approximately is going to be. And I know how to set our landing speeds at our destination. And I do that right then. Climbing out, we've just made our takeoff. That way I've got a way to check the numbers he gives us at the end of the flight. If the numbers are very far off, then I recalculate before I say anything, or I'll ask the engineer to do it. Well, I take a look at it, and our landing weight is going to be 102,000 pounds at DFW. Now, flying a Cherokee, 102,000 pounds is a lot. The empty weight of the airplane was 100,000 pounds. That means 176 passengers, our reserve fuel, and all of their bags and whatever mail and freight we've got weigh 2,000 pounds. I don't think so. So I turned around to the engineer. I said, Rick, would you mind refiguring that takeoff? He said, sure. He grabs it. And Captain and I go back to our conversation. About 30 seconds later, the engineer leans up, and there's not a drop of blood left in his face. And he says, guys, I apologize. I left out the 40,000 pounds of fuel. We just staggered that airplane into the air 40,000 pounds heavier than we thought it was.
Wow.
So I never pay attention to the numbers. I never, ever tell an airplane when it's ready to take off. I raise the nose, and when it's ready, it will rise into the air. I do that in the Cherokee, the 172, my Comanche, every airplane I've ever flown. I will not tell it when it's ready to fly.
That's a really good lesson.
That's amazing. Well, I want to ask this, and all your, 54 years of flying,
Yep.
when was the most scared moment?
Other than the scary takeoff.
Well, that one he got it in the air. The scary was probably when the engineer said, oops.
Yeah.
I had a charter one time in the Electra. I was co-pilot on the Electra. We went down to Marfa, Texas. We took the science department from the University of Texas. We stopped in Austin, picked them up. We went down there to dedicate, I think, the Mount McDonald Observatory. They were dedicating the telescope. They'd just taken over operation of the telescope. So we went down there for a couple of days, and we landed at the Marfa airport. The captain was a glider pilot who'd been down there a lot, and he knew the manager of the airport. And it was an old military field, and we landed down there, and the taxiways were not wide enough to support the airplane. So with the approval of the airport manager, we landed on 1-3 and went clear to the end of the runway and just turned around and parked it right at the end of the runway. And left it there for 2 days. Well, it rained. It rained pretty hard for a couple of days while we were doing all of our stuff there. We came back out to the airplane, and the wind had changed. So now we need to take off on the northeast runway. So we taxied up to the intersection. We start down the taxiway, and we'd gone maybe 700 feet, and all of a sudden it grinds to a stop and leans way over, and the captain looks out the window and shuts down pulls both emergency shutdown on the 2 engines on that side. We had broken through the pavement all the way to the axle.
Oh, my.
And
Through the pavement? You didn't come off the pavement,
No,
you went
through the
through.
pavement, yeah. The props were about this far off the ground. That's why he shut the
Yep, that'll do
engines
it.
down.
Scariest. I'm done.
On the
No,
ground, taxiing
no.
was the scariest.
I'm getting to it.
Oh, my gosh, there's more.
I'm getting to it.
That would, look.
We were taxiing. We were just
Yeah, they're
taxiing.
just taxiing.
That would so scare me.
It took them 24 hours to get it up out of the rut, and all the equipment and so forth. And the oil drilling crew that had the equipment that did that for us came out, and they said, well, we need to let the air out of the tires. Those tires have 165 pounds of pressure in them. And we need to let some of the air out of the tires, give it a bigger footprint so it won't do it again. Makes perfectly good sense.
Okay.
And I said, yeah, but do you have anything to pump them back up? He said, it's okay, Sonny, we've got the equipment. I mean, I'm 22, 23 years old, it's November
Okay, yeah.
68.
Yeah.
So what do I know? They get it all done. They didn't have the equipment. They couldn't pump the tires up. We also had expired the time required for inspection on the airplane, so we weren't able to carry passengers. We could fly Part 91 back to Dallas, but we can't carry even flight attendants with us. So we get everything done. We're low on hydraulic fluid. Excuse me. We're low on hydraulic fluid. We got some other things that we're concerned about. And we take off. Weather's not good in Dallas. I said, how about we just run up to Amarillo where we got maintenance and we get some of this taken care of. So we did that. We landed Amarillo. We take off from Amarillo, go back to Love Field, and now I'm flying the airplane. We're at 18,000 feet. We're running the de-icing equipment. We de-ice in sections. We de-ice the intersection between the fuselage and the engine, then the center section between the engines, and out the tips out for the engine, and then we do the tail. And we were in the clouds at 18,000 feet. We're starting to ice up. ATC has just given us a excuse me, a traffic alert. Can't see anybody out there because we're in the clouds. And just about that time, everything went black. It's night. Everything went black. We got our flashlights going, needle ball and airspeed, and things start coming back one at a time. And it had happened as we were starting the de-icing. So now we're getting a little superstitious. We're getting ice. Do we de-ice? Do we not? If we do it again and we lose this stuff and it doesn't come back, then what do we do? So we chose not to de-ice. So we flew the airplane to Love Field, and I shot the approach right down to 400 feet at Love Field, and they said we had about a half an inch of ice all over the airplane.
Wow.
And they said that the most likely reason that our controls didn't ice up was that I was hand flying the airplane and keeping the controls loose.
Wow.
Otherwise, if I'd been on the autopilot, as most pilots
built
do
up.
now, the ice would have just built up over the controls, and they'd have frozen in their position.
Wow.
Wow. Wow. Well, this has been amazing.
Yeah, I could talk to Tom all day.
Yeah, we really
I'll talk back.
Yeah.
he does, and we didn't even talk about how he doesn't even use headphones in a Cherokee.
Yeah. So you don't use headsets in your Cherokee to
No.
instruct?
First of all, headsets give me a serious headache,
Okay.
as I'm sure most people experience. I have a tendency to start my statements softly, and I finish softly, so nobody hears the first and last thing that I say. So I have to keep shouting to keep the microphone activated, and I'm shouting at my student. I don't like that. If I've got a student who's a little anxious, I can't bring their anxiety down. I can bring their anxiety down with voice inflection. All right, now, Christy, it's not that big a deal. What you're doing, you just missed this. You should have done. I can bring their anxiety down by voice. I can't do that with a headset.
Yeah.
I'm also listening to the airplane. I can hear,
Yeah.
I can hear an altitude change before it ever shows up on the altimeter. And I've always thought it's a little bit idiotic to sit and talk to somebody on the radio who's sitting 3 inches away from me.
That's definitely old school, and I can understand. I hadn't thought about, like, you can definitely hear your plane and know
Oh.
exactly. All right.
I mean, this has been an incredible experience. Thank
Incredible.
you so much for sharing with. I wish we
Well,
could.
you're certainly welcome.
I wish we could stay longer, but
Yeah.
next time we'll have to bring you back on another time.
And just one thing, I have no idea what value this may be, but tomorrow I will pass 55,000 hours.
Wow.
You're close, right?
Oh my goodness.
55,000 hours.
55,000.
That's incredible. Well,
Wow.
congratulations. I passed
Yeah.
1,500 this next week. So,
That's a big step, too.
Yeah.
It really is.
All right.
all right. Well, thank you so much.
You're sure welcome.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We look forward to speaking to the next baller pilot in the hangar.